Hi, my name's Rachel, and today I'm going to talk about a book that I expected to give 4 stars initially. I cracked it open, and by chapter 5, I was like, this is going to be a 5-star book. This is incredible. This is show-stopping. This is new. This is fresh. This is awesome. This is everything that I loved about the Angels episode of Doctor Who, meets the Agatha Christie episode of Doctor Who, meets Looper, meets Groundhog Day. I was enraptured. By the end, 1 star. It was a 1-star book. Today's book is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. This review came at the request of my patron Jessie. Jessie, I am so sorry if you loved this. I promise this rant is not a reflection of how I feel about you. This is the book that people get confused with Evelyn Hugo. Totally different books, by the way. That one is about a lady telling the story of like the loves of her life, sort of. This book is a time loop murder mystery. This is actually one of 2 mystery thrillers I've read this year, and I know that thanks to today's sponsor, which is the Fable app and their new reading stats feature. You might know Fable for their book clubs. Like my friend Meg runs Cozy Quilt Book Club on Fable, but now Fable has this beautiful reading stats feature where you can view your stats such as the number of books that you've read this year, reading streaks, your most read genres, your average book rating, which for me is a 3. Go me! You'd think it would be lower, didn't you? And your most read authors, which is how I found out that Colleen Hoover is my most read author this year, not the Fable app calling me out. You also get personalized reader insights, which provide you with like fun and insightful little tidbits about your reading habits. For instance, my reader summary generated by Fable says, "Eclectic soul searcher." That's me. Your taste blend with the suspense of Agatha Christie and pop culture love stories and deep dives into personal and fantastical struggles. Each book is a window into different souls, including yours. Intricately complex and unpredictably heartfelt. Oh my god, thank you! That is my reading taste. How'd you know? The reading stats feature is also so pretty. I have mine in pink, but you can also channel your inner Sleeping Beauty and make it blue or green. And Fable has made it so you can easily export your stats to share with your friends on social media. You can export and post to Instagram or wherever, or you could even print them out and put them in your reading journal. You can also export your Goodreads data with just a few clicks. Fable is free to download, and you can get started today and get your reading stats by downloading the app at the link that you see here, which is also available down in the description and in the pinned comment. Check out your reading stats and let me know how many books you have read this year. And thank you so much to Fable for sponsoring today's video. The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle is a book that you see on lists made by reviewers, and they don't really explain what it's about because it's so weird like Piranesi by this author, Suzanne something. They have a lot in common, but I would recommend Piranesi, whereas I would not recommend the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. This ended up being probably the most fat-phobic book that I have ever read in my life. I was not expecting this when I cracked this open, and I was having such a good time, and then somebody warned me on Goodreads, have you gotten to the fat phobia yet? And it was right before that happened, and I'm like, no, I must have, maybe it wasn't that, it's all bad, but like, maybe it wasn't so bad, and I just, sort of glossed over it. That's not what happened. I wish I had known. Oh my lord. This is, again, probably the most fat phobic thing. I was explaining it to Carlos, and he was like, is it really that bad? Like, you're saying things verbatim? And I'm like, I am quoting the book to you. Let me give you the synopsis, because the point is not the fat phobia, certainly, and I can talk about the book, and sort of divorce the fat phobia from it for a bit and talk about what I liked and didn't like, but the fat phobia made it so hard to read this book for such an incredibly long chunk of time. I can't recommend this. The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle is a breathlessly addictive mystery that follows one man's race to find a killer with an astonishing time-turning twist that means nothing and no one are quite what they seem. Aidan Bishop knows the rules. Evelyn Hardcastle will die every day until he can identify her killer and break the cycle. So what they mean by every day is he's living in a loop. He's doing the same day every day. He's doing a Groundhog Day. But every time the day begins again, Aidan wakes up in the body of a different guest at Blackheath Manor, and some of his hosts are more helpful than others, with a locked room mystery that Agatha Christie would envy, Stuart Turton unfurls a breakneck novel of intrigue and suspense. And it calls it an inventive twist in a thriller of such unexpected creativity it will leave readers guessing until the very last page. I disagree. By the end, I wasn't guessing anymore. By the end of this 17-hour-long audiobook, that's way too long. By the end of it, I no longer cared. I just wanted it to be over. Okay, so this book has amassed quite a lot of attention in certain reading circles. It's not really like a book talk famous book. This came out in 2019, which I believe is the same year as Evelyn Hugo, which made things a little confusing, certainly. It has a time loop and a murder mystery narrative together, which is great. I really like the idea of this. And certainly that I would say the first like 10 chapters was so excellent, but it was too ambitious. This one flew too close to the sun. Ultimately, it fell so short in fully using the potential of the time loop theme, which is such a great idea. If you've never watched the movie Looper, I really like the idea of like living in this loop where, I mean, the time loop can be used to explain like both like the Groundhog Day situation. However, it also is talking about like non-preventable events. So it's like it's sort of like an infinity, right? So no matter what you do, some things are inevitable and the things are going to repeat no matter what, unless somebody makes a huge decision that disrupts this loop. And that is what happens in the movie Looper. And you have these like great opportunities for this exploration of, are some things inevitable? Should we allow things to occur, or should we disrupt this, timeline? I also love in this realm of looping, where we have, for instance, the Angels episode, the first Angels episode that we had with David Tennant in Doctor Who, where David Tennant actually takes quite a back seat, and he's sort of playing a part that was only given to him by this woman who really takes like the main character center stage of the episode, and Doctor Who is only in it to present this information that you find out she first gave to him in the first place, but past her doesn't know that, future her does. So there's so much you can do here, and Turton tried to do all of it in 7.5 Deaths, and unfortunately by the end it was too much, and it was also very boring. How did you make it boring? The problem really lies in it being way too long and having too many characters that the audience doesn't give a shit about. The time loop device, instead of serving as a catalyst for profound character development, which it should, that's what it did in Looper, or thematic exploration, or just fucking fun like it does in Doctor Who, it became a convoluted plot device that detracted from any coherence in the narrative. It became messy, it became tiresome, and the repetitive nature of the time loop means that you need to do these stories in a compact way and not make a 17-hour audiobook. Repetition can be used very effectively to build tension, build suspense, but in this it is excessive to the point where it's just monotony. The constant revisiting of the same event, the same scene, I should like that, and instead it was stagnating. It felt like, I've explained another book like this before, but it felt like going somewhere in traffic and only moving 3 or 4 feet at a time and then stopping, and then by the end you're so burnt out you don't even want to go to your destination, you just want to go home. That's what reading this book felt like. It just felt tedious and drawn out in a way that is not satisfying at the end whatsoever. It felt gratuitous, and the handling of the time loop, as I said, just felt like it lacked any sort of thematic significance. It didn't feel like it had any sort of depth to me outside of what I've already experienced watching other media or reading other media. This did not do anything of substance or of significance for me. Maybe I would have felt that way if it were shorter, but it being so drawn out, I think ruined any sort of the thematic conversation we were having. Because a well-executed time loop story usually has these existential questions, and also because we are Aidan Bishop is technically our main character, but he wakes up and doesn't remember who he is, and also he never inhabits his own body. He's jumping around in multiple people's bodies trying to solve the murder of Evelyn Hardcastle at the behest of this guy in a plague doctor mask. which is a very odd sentence. I feel like I just pulled that out of a hat. It's a Mad Lib. So he's not just experiencing like the theme of identity within himself, he's experiencing it like how being in all these different people's bodies affects him, and how that dives into the nature of free will, which is like inherently one of the core concepts of like the time loop theme, and also the nature of reality is another one when you're doing the Groundhog Day situation, and also fate. Fate is a big one for time loop themes, but I don't think that it did any of these themes in a meaningful way, maybe outside of identity, but by the end I feel like that was a pointless conversation as well, because he'd be in these different people's heads and he'd sort of make decisions based on like who they were as a person, and it was starting to affect like his sense of self, although he doesn't remember who he is, and that'll really fuck you up, like being in all these different people's heads. And you know, it gives you this question of like, okay, well, if I'm in this person's head, then am I still me? What really makes you you? When I used to watch a lot of debates on TikTok, one of the arguments that people would present to people who were arguing against trans identity is, if you took your brain out and put it in the body of the opposite gender, would you still be whatever gender you are? And so it really like, it's like a conversation around sense of self, like how we define who we are. And instead of delving into these conversations in any sort of, again, significant way, I just felt like we prioritized like the intricacies of the mystery plot, which I like in short format. Like again, I could watch Murder, She Wrote, because that's half an hour, 60 minutes long, not a 14-hour audiobook. It just felt like a complete missed opportunity. And also it did not lend itself to any sort of like emotional resonance within me. I did not care about any of these people, because all the people we're jumping around in bodies of, I mostly don't care about, and the people that he's talking to, I also don't care about. Most of these people are either rich people or they are servants at Blackheath Manor who gossip. I just did not care about any of these people. I don't care about who has a secret child with who, or who's secretly dealing drugs. The novel, the narrative never made me care about anything, and in a 17-hour long audiobook, you have to care about something in order to get through at the end and feel like you've had any sort of positive experience, and I did not. And I think that part of that is just the sheer abundance of the characters. I mean, my god, the amount of, we're in like 8 different bodies first of all, so then we have to interact with all of these people on top of that. Each new time loop, each new body, although we jump around from body to body, we don't even, oh my god, that was really driving me bonkers. We didn't just like, all right, one day we're in this body, one day we're in this body. We were jumping back and forth from body to body. That's where it really got confusing. And most of these are just like old white men. I can't differentiate between them. It's very I needed to make a list, which I should not have to do, but the sheer like multitude of characters that get introduced every single day make it so challenging for me to get any sort of like emotional investment going in any character's journey, a single one of them. Like by the end, I don't even care that Evelyn is gonna get murdered. You really have to have depth of characterization in order to just like sustain your reader, and this doesn't have that. It also doesn't have good depth of theme. What are we doing? So while it presents like this really interesting premise and like different aspects of like the time loop idea, the Groundhog Day, the inevitability, it's not doing anything for the thematic or the emotional pieces for the reader, in my opinion, in my reading experience with this book. And it doesn't really engage those great questions of the time loop in a way that I like was hanging on like to the narrative, thinking like, wow, I never thought of it that way. And that's half the fun of presenting a new time loop story. So I don't think that this is like a really good resonating work of fiction just because it didn't do anything in an outstanding way. It did everything either mediocre or poorly. So one of the big complaints that I have is the fat phobia, and that's because there's this guy who Evelyn Hardcastle is forced by her parents into a situation where she is going to be engaged to be married to this man named Ravenwood, is that his last name? Who is a very rich man who will clean up her father's debts. Mr. Hardcastle has a ton of debts, and also Evelyn, they think, is being put into this position because 19 years ago Evelyn was supposed to be watching her brother and didn't, and as a result her brother was murdered. So you learn more about like what actually happened at the murder, and again, this just got so convoluted I did not care. All this to say, the point is that Evelyn is sort of being punished by having to marry this guy Ravenwood, and he says, you know, I'm not interested in like any sort of like actual relationship, which works out for Evelyn because she considers him to be disgusting. Everybody considers him to be disgusting, and I don't mean disgusting as in morally, I mean disgusting as in physically, because this man is fat. So this this starts, I believe, if I remember correctly, at around chapter 13, which is about 17% into the book, and it was so shocking the way that this man was written about. I mean, truly, I was flabbergasted. So Aiden Bishop, the main character, enters this man's body, and from the minute he enters this man's body, everything is made to harp on how gross this man is because he's fat. So like, the servant comes in and brings him a meal, and like the way he eats is told to us to be just disgusting. And then the servant has to help him get up and get to the bathroom, and it says that Aiden Bishop looks at himself and like looks at his body and looks at, like, it even makes fun of like how tiny his penis is, and then he just like breaks down sobbing over how he looks. And this was it was awful. It was truly awful. And listen, I have been a fat person for a while, although recently I got a comment telling me, not even telling me, somebody was watching something of mine, and I had like a full body shot, which I don't often do, and they were like, now that I've seen the full body, I don't think that, you know, Rachel calling herself a fat person is correct. She looks normal. And I'm like, that is so, like, so wackadoodle to me. So first of all, I recently lost like 25 pounds because reasons, but like commenting on anybody's body is just like a very odd thing to do, especially when it's like, I just feel like fat people, we sort of get treated, and even by other fat people, get treated like we're not in conversations about ourselves. And that's very much how like it felt reading Aiden Bishop talking about being in this man's body. It was so horrendous. Like the descriptions of this man walking. Aiden's like, I can't walk around in this body. I can't get anything done in this body. I'm so out of breath. Even my sweat smells disgusting. And I'm like, none of this was necessary. That's really like the core issue, is that it was written just to harp on how disgusting this man was for no purpose. And he's like, I just can't wait to get out of this body so that I can get in another body and get things done. And I'm like, oh my God, how awful. Like, I'm sitting here and my jaw is on the floor. Like, I cannot believe that somebody wrote this and thought that that was a good idea. So let me give you an example. My stomach would drag me toward the food, but my body's collapsing beneath me. I need to rest. The armchair takes my weight with ill temper, the legs bowing under strain. I attempt to turn, but there's too much of Ravencourt, not Ravenwood, Ravencourt, and too little of the seat. Okay, so this is in chapter 11 when he's first in Ravencourt's body, and the servant is undressing him. I have no doubt this is all part of the routine, but the shame's too much to bear. Though this isn't my body, I'm humiliated by it, appalled by the waves of flesh lapping against my hips, the way my legs rub together as I walk. I shoo my companion away, but it's pointless. I want to tell him to go hang, to leave me in peace. Opening my eyes, I find myself reflected in a full-length mirror on the wall. I resemble some grotesque caricature of the human body, my skin jaundiced and swollen, a flaccid penis peeking out of an unkempt crop of pubic hair. Overcome by disgust and humiliation, I let out a sob. I just find that so abominable. What a terrible way to write about a fat person. Like, oh my gosh, it's so, listen, we don't need to perpetuate anymore. Like, fat people, just by virtue of being fat, when we go to our doctor's office, when we talk about pain, they're like, well, it's probably because you're fat. And like, I didn't used to be the way I used to be larger. I gained a bunch of weight because of a bunch of hormone fluctuations after having a pregnancy that went to term, a miscarriage, another miscarriage, and then another pregnancy that went to term that I basically had to be sort of on bed rest for because of health complications. It was very hard for me. I gained a bunch of weight. I mean, medically, like there was nothing I could do, but people don't see me that way. People see me as like, you're lazy, you're fat, you eat too much. And that's very much the narrative of this book. And fat people eating, we always have to feel bad about eating because we have to apologize for every step we take that we're not taking in a gym. But even if we are in a gym clothes shouldn't be like marketed to us because we shouldn't be fat in the first place. And then everything that we eat, we have to apologize for, like, sorry, I have to eat, instead of starving myself. And that's how it was kind of a bit triggering. Like, if I wasn't, you know, telling Carlos about it right after it happened, it would have been worse if I had sat with it by myself. How awful, like how truly awful. And I already have to combat like fat phobia that my kids are picking up on at school. Can you imagine like me handing this book to somebody and then having to like, I'm gonna have to have this entire conversation about, by the way that fat people are talked about in this book is not appropriate despite the fact that the world tells you that it is. I mean, just truly, like, I wanted to punch Stuart in the face. That was such an awful, awful thing to do. Oh, I'm getting heated. Like that, like to make his entire characterization just about him being a fat person and how he can't even move throughout the world. He can barely get things done. He's so disgusting. His sweat is disgusting. His penis is disgusting. His pubic hair is disgusting, all because he's fat. He's fat, so he is more gross than anybody else in this house. The only person that isn't physically gross but is just as gross is the rapist in the house. Like this is what we do to fat people. We characterize them as disgusting by virtue of being fat. Why would you do? I'm horrified. I'm horrified by this. I mean, and it wasn't just one chapter is the thing. That goes on for chapter after chapter after chapter that we are in this man's body. Everything he eats is not just like he ate a scone. It's him eating, and he eats so voraciously and it's so gross. He sits in a chair and he sits in it and he's too wide for the it's like, oh my god, why are you doing this? Why? What was the point of this? Ooh, I need to go get some water. I'm getting heated. Hi, it's me. We're gonna switch over to this setup. I'm sorry, I don't like to do this, but it takes a lot to put on a full beat, so this is what we're switching to. Sorry, I know I just lost some of you. I got really frustrated talking about the fat phobia in this because I think that really ruined my reading experience with this book. I was just distraught reading it. It was so bad. What ended up happening, like plot-wise, I honestly can't say for sure or not whether or not I would have enjoyed this book more had that fat phobia not been present. And like, I'm not saying it was like a one-liner. You are inundated with it for several chapters. As long as Ravencourt is in the picture, every scene somehow is going to reference his weight and make him out to be this like disgusting animal. And I was really tired by the end of dealing with Ravencourt's chapters. Again, maybe this would have been better if we were hopping heads, and I dreaded anytime we would have to hop back into like Ravencourt's head. And by the end, I had just absolutely had it with dealing with the fat phobia. So the plot itself, I can tell you a little bit about, but I'm not all that excited to tell you about it because by the end, I really did not care whatsoever plot-wise what was happening in this book. It became, and again, I think that this was very much tainted by that. It was truly disgusting fat phobia. I think that this is one of the most overly complicated and convoluted books in such an unenjoyable way where it's like, I know some people read House of Leaves, which is pretty complicated and they love it. This is overcomplicated in a way that is not enjoyable. And the mysteries, there are so many reveals. So for instance, the Hardcastle family, I'm going to get into spoilers now. So if you don't want spoilers, this is your time to exit. I'm not going to tell you like every single thing that happens because again, so much happens and none of it was I didn't care. This book really did not do a good job of making me care about anybody or anything. And the reveals were I just did not give a shit. So last warning for spoilers. So the Hardcastle family had 3 children. One of them died when he was young. Evelyn Hardcastle, as in the name on the cover, was supposed to be watching him. And she tells you in like first couple chapters when our main character is in the head of like the first host that she wasn't watching properly. She, was off doing, young person shit and she just didn't care enough to watch her brother. So it comes to light that all of the Hardcastle children are actually not fathered by Mr. Hardcastle. You get told throughout this book, like, you don't see Mrs. Hardcastle. All you hear about is like, Miss Hardcastle did this, she's setting Evelyn up to marry Ravencourt, she's doing this, she fathered her children with this other guy, Charlie. And it's just like the amount of times we went back and forth on, is she bad or not? And I just didn't care. And then by the end, all of this shit that we were putting on Mrs. Hardcastle, Evelyn was fucking doing. It's just like, look at this terrible woman. And I'm like, oh, I don't care. And Evelyn, it turned out, so there was like a fake out where like Madeline, there's a character named Madeline, and she's actually Evelyn Hardcastle. And it turned out that Evelyn Hardcastle killed multiple people. Like a bunch of people ended up dead, and Evelyn Hardcastle was behind multiple deaths. She faked her own death. She killed just a shit ton of people. And then at the end, you know, she comes to kill our main character, who we find out in real life his name was Aiden, and Anna, who is another person who is experiencing this time loop, she comes to kill them. And I just didn't care. At that point, I was just like, okay, I'm just ready for this to be over. I don't care at all. And the premise of this was you're supposed to find out who's trying to kill Evelyn Hardcastle. There is this really cool idea of a character called the Plague Doctor, and this guy shows up multiple times to like guide Aiden, our main character, who's, you know, hopping around in different people's heads. Again, this is so convoluted, it's very hard to explain. The Plague Doctor, I thought, was such an interesting character because when he was introduced and Aiden is like, why are you doing this? What I thought we were getting was sort of like a deity type being, sort of like a malevolent kind of deity who just likes to play games. I thought that that's what we were doing, and I thought that was such an interesting idea, and that's not what ended up happening. What ended up happening is that Anna, the other person who, and I felt like this came out of absolutely fucking nowhere, Anna, the other person who was experiencing the time loop, who, you know, they need to figure out who's trying to kill Evelyn Hardcastle and turn in that name to the Plague Doctor in order to get free of this time loop. And they tell Aiden, well, Anna, you're here because Anna is here because she was a terrorist in real life, and she is here paying her dues, and by the way, in real life she killed your sister, and this was all about redeeming Anna the terrorist. I just did not understand. There were so many different reveals, and none of them felt like they're technically connected to each other, but none of them felt connected to each other in a good way. You know what this is like? I'm listening to the new Taylor Swift album right now, right? Okay, so it's fine. It's just that I thought that there would be like a cohesive narrative in this album where all the things sort of like linked together. It's kind of how Folklore felt, which I really like the album Folklore. Well, I don't feel like there is a cohesive, you know, thing going on here. It just felt like, how can I throw in several different things and then sort of kind of connect them? Because they're in the same book, so they're connected. I can't believe I was supposed to care. I don't know what Stuart was expecting from his reader, but whatever it was not going to be gotten out of me. But again, I am not sure, if I'm being honest, I am not sure how objectively I can, because I'm not sure how I would feel about all of these reveals if I hadn't experienced, number one, the worst fat phobia I've ever seen in a book. And second of all, it's too goddamn long. There are too many people in this book. It's too many people to keep track of. I mean, it's an ungodly amount of people. And like, I can keep track of an exceptional amount of people. Like, I read high fantasy and there's a lot of politicking, so there's always a lot of players involved. I can keep track, but when you don't differentiate them, when they are all just, well, this is an annoying British guy, and this is an annoying British guy who, oh, look how fat he is, and look, this is an annoying British guy who fathered this guy's children, and everybody blended together, and names would get brought up, and I'm like, who the fuck are we talking about again? This was probably one of the most, not even unsatisfying. Unsatisfying doesn't even cover it. It was one of the most unpleasant reading experiences. I remember just feeling like if this audiobook does not get over with soon, I may never read again. Like, it was burning me out. I'm really disappointed because, again, at the beginning of this, I saw so much potential. We had such a good idea. It was everything I love about those like really interesting plots and those Doctor Who episodes and stuff. And then by the end, we're talking about like, this is a purgatory for a terrorist, and also Evelyn Hardcastle is a serial killer. Okay, so that is my review of the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. By the way, the name is so stupid. There's a reason why the UK version only says 7 deaths. The half is pointless. You can make up your own reason. There's really no reason for it. This is just stupid. And again, take that with a grain of salt because I really was very much affected by the tremendous amount of fat phobia. Like, if I sat here and read to you all the excerpts of the fat phobia that I was reading to Carlos and telling my friends about, I would be here for just a half an hour doing that alone because it was so much, and it was obviously very deeply triggering because I can't get past it. So that was very frustrating. That's a good way to put this. This was the most frustrating reading experiences experiences I've ever had, because I went in thinking that I would like this. I really did. And then at the beginning, I thought I was going to love it. I thought, yeah, it's 17 hours. I'm not sure how we're going to pull this off, but I have faith in this author. And then by chapter, 10 to 13 or so, all faith is lost. All faith and goodwill out the window. I would probably never read another Stuart Turton book in my life. Now, what's interesting is this cover looks an awful lot like the Lachlan's series cover, and that's a better book. That has lots of players in it, and all of them I can keep track of, and that's a fantasy book, so not just a murder mystery. So I think that that's a testament to Robert Jackson Bennett just being a better writer. But all this to say, if you want to read a book with a similar cover, certainly, nothing in common, but if you want to read a book with a similar cover, I am always going to shout out Robert Jackson Bennett's The Lachlan series. Foundry Side is such a good book. Me and Carlos both absolutely love it. I would highly recommend, and there is not a tremendous, enormous amount of fat phobia for you to sit through for chapter upon chapter upon chapter. This was a major no for me. I'm really, really bummed out about it. I really thought that I'm like reading the first chapters of this thinking like, wow, I can finally just like absolutely gush about a time loop book and have like nothing but good things to say, and I can't. Another book that I actually would encourage you to read though is Susanna Clarke's Piranesi. This book, 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, is very weird, and the weirdness was what I initially very much loved about it, and I thought we were going to go cool places with it and answer really interesting questions. Unfortunately, we did not, but we do that in Piranesi. So if you're looking for something kind of weird that I did give 5 stars to, that has a mystery, not so much a murder mystery, though there are, technically you're wondering how certain people ended up dead. It's kind of a murder mystery. It's hard to explain because it's so weird, but I would recommend Susanna Clarke's Piranesi, which is an exploration of like the human psyche and the transportative power of imagination. You are in this place with, it's an endless amount of hallways with statues upon statues, and every once in a while the place floods, and the main character, he has no idea who he is, and at first you're asking a lot of questions, but he's not, and you're very confused, and the confusion in Piranesi pays off in a way that the confusion in the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle does not. Whereas 7.5 Deaths, I feel like introduced more confusion along the way in order to try to like make more exciting plot twists. Piranesi knew exactly what it was doing before it started out, and it introduced like those questions and then added in questions in a way that felt very organic and answered all of those questions in a way that was so satisfying in the end. I really loved it, and she's really like blurring the lines between like reality and illusion, which 7.5 Deaths also tried to do, but in a way that I did not like. Piranesi, the guy calls himself Piranesi, his experience is what you're experiencing for so long in the book, and you're like, what is going on? But then you're also just sort of like sitting with him as he does his day-to-day life living in these endless hallways. And the only other person is this guy, the other, who shows up once in a while, who isn't very kind to him. And Piranesi, you have to sort of like deal with his unwavering belief in what his existence is, even though you're like, that can't possibly be it. There has to be more to this. So it's really like making you question your own perception. It makes you like think about like relying on your own senses. And I feel like the theme in Piranesi was like so clear. It's talking about like human isolation, whereas in the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, I don't know what the fucking theme was. I couldn't tell you. I was so confused by the end what we were fucking talking about. Piranesi, living in this like house of endless hallways, he is so profoundly alone, except when the other shows up and is like, hey, do you have any information on our surroundings? And then the other fucks off. And Piranesi like makes these like strong bonds with the bones of people who he has found, and he's like compiled them and made sure that he, like takes care of them. And I love Piranesi. I love his humanity and his kindness. He finds so much solace in exploring this house that he lives in, and his experience of the house, he's talking about the house and explaining it to you in a way that is so beautifully done. And I really felt like Piranesi existed outside of the book. He had such like a love for the beauty of the halls filled with these statues, and he has all of these like thoughts on these statues, and they're really his only companions in the world because it's just him living in this house of endless hallways. And as he's delving into, I don't want to give you any spoilers because it's so much more fun when you just dive in and know nothing, which is what happened with me. Mari from My Name is Marinez recommended this book, and I read it and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. It's not going to be for everybody, as the 7.5 Deaths is obviously obviously not gonna be for everybody. It certainly wasn't for me. But Piranesi is like a weird book that talks about like, you know, identity and your sense of memory and how that makes you tied to like your self-discovery, which is something that I think this book was trying to do. But then with that terrorist bit at the end, I was like, that's it? So if you want a weird book that talks about like memory and self-discovery, then go for Piranesi, and I would skip the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. So I would say that both books sort of defy categorization, but I would categorize one as an excellent reading experience and one as a bomb. So that is my opinion. I am all done with this book. I never want to read it again in my life. I kind of want Carlos to read it so that we can rage and he can explain it back to me again, because I feel like there was a lot that just went over my head because it was about a bunch of old British men that I didn't care about. So I would be interested in his opinions on it, and I'm interested in yours, so leave your comments and questions down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye. Hello, it's Trashcan Rachel, and I'm just here to say thank you for being a friend to my Therapy Bills patrons, and those are Alexander, Brittany Bobitney, Cami, Choco's Waiting for Not All Men podcast, Chris, Dalton, DJ Rocktopus, Ellie, Emperor's New Blues, Aaron with 2 E's, Eric, Ethel Go Lightly, Galaxy Bot, Jack, Jesse, Jill, Jess, John E, Julie D, Kelly No K, Casey McKenzie, Kate W, Caitlin M, Quinn, Lady Kittybug, Lemon Jelly, Lex, Lily B, Max B, Mixer Boneless, Alice, Panoramic Demon, Peggy Lou, Rain, Reese, SJ, Samar, Scarlet, Shiny, SMK, Spoopy, Steph B, 2 Orbit, White Raven 13, Zorvictia, and Chai Guy. Thank you all so much for being here and being a friend. And last but not least, before I go, I have to say thank you for being a friend to my Potato Starch Marxist patrons, and those are Alejandra, Alicia, Amanda, Amanda D, Andy, Angelica, Anita, Artie the Ninth, Ashley H, Ava, Ballads and Bookends, Beck, Blake Lemon Pants, Blythe, Bookish Bats, Bookish Brainrot, Bree, Caitlin, Cardinal Ginger, Carlin, Casper, Kate W, Catherine, Kathy, Chris, CJ, Clementine, Cole, Colleen, Corwin, Cosmic, Danielle, Darren, Deborah, Diet Goth, Dilf Enthusiast, Dorian, Dorothea, E.T. Cosgrove, Ebby, Emerald Dodge, Emily A, Emily L, Emma, Aaron, Ezra, Fiona, Gadarn, Hannah C, Harpy Kuro, Haley G, Ilianaka, India Inks, J.M. Tennant, Jakenna, Jay is on Olympus, Jelly V, Jen Michelle, Genderqueer, Jenny G, Jessa Sue, Jillian, Jojo Bookish, Kat, Catherine, Katie L, Kaylee, Kayala, Kendra, Kiara, Laughing Cat Dog, Laura, Lauren, Lazarus Ray, Library of Scars, Lindsay M, Lisa B, Lisa L, LP, Luciri, Lustful Octopus, Martin, Madison, Man-Eating Plant, Marcella, Marquita, Malara, Mentally Unwell, May, Molly, James, Natalie, Never, Nicole G, Nicole R, Nyan Binary, Paige P, Penny Chilling, Foxglove, Rachel B, Reba, Rebecca, Rivi, Ronnie, Rosie, Rowan, Secoria, Sadie, Sakia Lume, Samantha, Sammy, Sarah, Sarah the Bear, Sarah Z, Shamed, Shannon, Sheen Onion, Sean, T. Delegati, Tay, Talia, 3 Old Dogs, Tiana, Toast, Trashcan Teddy, Tito Phoenix, and Writer A. Thank you all so much for being a friend.